There's a moment that happens with certain drones where you stop thinking about what they are and you start paying attention to how they make you feel. It doesn't happen on the first flight. It doesn't even happen on the second or third. It creeps in quietly after the novelty wears off. That's what happened with the DJI Neo 2. At first, I treated it like exactly what it looks like on paper. A small, casual drone designed to be easy, limited by size, and clearly not meant to replace anything bigger, and that framing made sense. Until I realized something odd, I kept flying it even when I didn't need to. Not because I was testing something, not because I was chasing a specific shot, but because flying it felt comfortable. That's a strange thing to say about a drone, but it matters more than people admit. With a lot of drones, even small ones, there's always a background task running in your head. You're managing the aircraft, you're thinking about wind, battery, corrections, stability, and whether the drone is about to remind you that it's smaller than it looks. Even experienced pilots do this subconsciously. With the Neo 2, that background noise fades faster than expected. You launch, it settles, and it just stays composed, no twitching, no nervous micro corrections, no constant reminder that you need to babysit it. And when that happens, your attention shifts. You stop managing the drone and you start thinking about where you want to fly next. That shift is subtle, but it's the core of why the Neo 2 feels different over time. This video isn't about whether the Neo 2 is powerful. It's not about whether it's fast, and it's definitely not about squeezing numbers out of a spec sheet. It's about why this drone feels so easy to live with, and why that ease comes with a very specific trade-off that only becomes clear after weeks of use, because the longer you fly the Neo 2, the more obvious its personality becomes. This is not a drone designed to impress you immediately. It's designed to reduce friction. Everything about it, from how it launches to how it holds position to how it tracks, is tuned to remove small stresses that usually pile up during flight. And when those stresses disappear, something interesting happens. You fly more casually, you fly more often, you fly without overthinking. That's the environment where the Neo 2 thrives. But that same design philosophy also explains its biggest limitation, one that people often misunderstand when they only look at the numbers. And to explain that properly, we first need to talk about how this drone behaves in the air, not as a machine, but as a flying object you interact with. Because the Neo 2 doesn't just fly, it responds. The first thing you notice after spending time with the Neo 2 is how little drama there is in its movement. Small stick inputs produce small, predictable responses. Larger inputs scale smoothly. Instead of snapping into motion, when you stop input, the drone doesn't overshoot and correct itself aggressively. It eases into position and holds. That sounds basic, but on a small drone, it's actually rare. Most compact drones feel eager. They surge forward, then pull back. They correct hard, then soften. It works, but it keeps reminding you that the drone is working to stay stable. The Neo 2 doesn't advertise that effort. Even when the wind picks up slightly, it doesn't fight it loudly, it adjusts quietly. The frame stays composed, the movement stays readable. You don't get the sense that the drone is one gust away from losing confidence. That calm behavior changes how you fly. You're less cautious with minor movements. You trust the drone to settle. You don't hover endlessly waiting for the perfect moment. And that trust builds surprisingly fast. A lot of drones are technically stable. They can hover, hold position, and maintain altitude, but stability alone doesn't create trust. Trust comes from consistency. The Neo 2 behaves the same way every time you fly it. Not just in perfect conditions, but in slightly imperfect ones too. That consistency is what makes it feel predictable, and predictability is what removes anxiety. You're not constantly watching for corrections. You're not bracing for sudden changes. You're not thinking, okay, don't mess this up. You're just flying. That's when a drone stops feeling like a piece of equipment and starts feeling like a tool. And that's also when you start flying longer sessions. mentally, not physically. A lot of people jump straight to flight time when they talk about the Neo 2. And yes, we're going to talk about it, honestly, later. But if you start there, you miss the point. Flight time only feels short when flying feels stressful. If every minute in the air feels like work, you want more minutes. If every minute feels smooth and productive, you don't feel rushed. The Neo 2 belongs firmly in the second category, and that's why its biggest limitation doesn't feel like a flaw at first. Like, it feels like a boundary you only notice once you've enjoyed the experience. That's the real story here. And now that the foundation is clear, here we can start unpacking how this drone behaves when you push it a little further, how it tracks, how it stabilizes motion, and why it encourages you to keep flying even when logic says you should stop. Once you get past that initial sense of calm, the next question becomes obvious. What happens when things stop being gentle? Because it's easy for a drone to look good when everything is slow. Smooth hover, slow pans, light wind, most modern drones can handle that. The real test starts when movement becomes unpredictable. This is where the Neo 2 quietly separates itself. When you start adding speed, sharper turns, quicker direction changes, uneven ground below, the drone doesn't suddenly change personality, it doesn't become jumpy, it doesn't tighten up or start fighting itself. It stays relaxed, and that's unusual for a drone in this size and category. A lot of small drones rely heavily on aggressive corrections to keep footage usable. The stabilization works, but you can feel it. The image snaps back into place. The movement looks slightly artificial, like the drone is constantly fixing mistakes after they happen. The Neo 2 takes a different approach. Instead of reacting hard after motion occurs, it anticipates motion and smooths it out as it happens. When you accelerate, the camera doesn't lag behind and then catch up. When you slow down, it doesn't overshoot and correct. The motion feels continuous. That continuity is what makes the footage feel natural instead of processed. You don't get that digital smoothing look where everything feels glued together unnaturally. The horizon stays controlled, but the movement still feels alive. This is especially noticeable during lateral movement and gentle arcs. The drone doesn't flatten the motion, it preserves it. And that matters more than people realize, because smooth footage isn't just about stability, or it's about rhythm. Now let's talk about tracking, because this is where expectations are usually low for small drones. On paper, tracking modes often sound impressive. In reality, many of them feel stressed. The drone constantly adjusts distance, speed, and framing as if it's trying to keep up with something it doesn't fully understand. The Neo 2 doesn't track like that. When you lock onto a subject, it doesn't rush to perfect framing immediately. It settles first, then it follows. That delay, that half second of patience, changes everything. It means the drone isn't constantly overcorrecting. It's not speeding up just to slow down again. It's not hunting for position. It chooses a comfortable distance and maintains it. When the subject speeds up, the drone accelerates smoothly. When the subject slows, it eases back. When the path curves, it arcs instead of snapping. The result is tracking that feels intentional instead of reactive. This is exactly what you see in the bike follow footage. Even though the mode is technically designed for bicycles, it adapts remarkably well to something heavier and faster. The drone doesn't feel confused by the speed difference. It doesn't drift wide or close in aggressively, it just follows. Now, obstacle avoidance is one of those features that's easy to advertise and hard to implement gracefully. Many drones technically avoid obstacles, but they do it by stopping suddenly, changing altitude abruptly, or jerking sideways in a way that ruins the shot. The Neo 2 avoids obstacles more politely. When something enters its path, it doesn't slam on the brakes unless it absolutely has to. It adjusts course gradually. Sometimes it shifts slightly higher, sometimes slightly wider, but always in a way that preserves the flow of movement. You notice this most when flying through semi-complex environments, on paths, trees, uneven terrain. The drone doesn't feel like it's fighting the environment. It feels like it's navigating through it. Like, that's a big reason why the footage stays watchable even when conditions aren't ideal. The camera stays steady, the movement stays readable, the shot stays intact. And again, all of this builds trust. Here's where things get interesting. Because the Neo 2 flies this smoothly, you don't feel the passage of time the same way you do with more demanding drones. You're not mentally exhausted after a flight. You're not relieved that you landed successfully. You're satisfied. That satisfaction is what makes the battery behavior feel different than expected. You're not landing because something went wrong. You're landing because the session feels complete. And that's an important distinction. With other drones, battery warnings often feel like interruptions. With the Neo 2, they feel like natural endpoints. And that brings us directly to the part everyone wants to talk about, the battery enigma, but now finally in the right context. Because without understanding how the Neo 2 flies, it's impossible to understand why its flight time feels the way it does. By the time you've flown the Neo 2 for a while, the battery stops being a surprise and starts becoming part of the rhythm, and that's an important distinction, because most battery discussions online start from the wrong place. They start with expectations set by spec sheets, marketing numbers, or comparisons that ignore how people actually fly. So let's reset the frame. The Neo 2 is not a drone you fly conservatively by accident. You don't baby it. You don't tiptoe around trying to save power. Yet the way it flies encourages you to move, reposition, try another angle, make one more pass. That alone changes how the battery feels. In real use, if you fly the Neo 2 the way most people naturally do, short climbs, braking, lateral movement, hovering to reframe, a bit of wind, some tracking, you're realistically looking at around 9 to 10 minutes of solid, usable flight before it's time to think about landing safely. If you slow things down, smoother lines, gentler inputs, less aggressive corrections, you can stretch that to roughly 12 to 13 minutes. Those numbers are consistent. They don't swing wildly and they don't feel unpredictable. Because with the Neo 2, you're not wasting time fighting instability. You're not repeating shots because something went wrong. You're not hovering nervously while the drone struggles to hold position. Almost every second in the air feels productive. Here's the part that often gets misunderstood. The Neo 2 doesn't have short flight time because the battery is bad. In fact, the battery itself is more mature and better behaved than the original Neos. The flight time feels shorter because the drone is doing more work constantly. The motors are stronger. The stabilization system is always active. The flight controller is making continuous micro adjustments. Obstacle sensing is running. Tracking algorithms are processing movement in real time. Even when the drone looks calm, it's thinking, and that's the key difference. On simpler drones, you often get longer hover times because the drone isn't correcting much. It's letting the environment push it around a little. The footage might still be usable, but the drone itself is working less. The Neo 2 refuses to do that. It spends energy to maintain confidence. That confidence, the calm hover, the smooth tracking, the predictable response, all comes at a cost, and that cost is power. What surprised me most after a few weeks wasn't the flight time itself, it was how rarely it frustrated me. On paper, 9 to 13 minutes sounds limiting. In practice, it rarely feels that way, because I'm not cutting flights short due to mistakes. I'm not abandoning clips. I'm not redoing passes. I land because the session feels finished. That's a very different experience from drones where you land because something went wrong, or because you spent half the battery correcting problems. With the Neo 2, the battery warning feels like a polite tap on the shoulder, not a slap. You've had a good session, time to land. And that's why expectations matter so much with this drone. The Neo 2 isn't designed for endurance flights. It's not built for staying airborne as long as possible at the expense of behavior. It's built for confidence first flying. DJI clearly optimized this drone for quick launches, stable behavior, predictable tracking, stress-free landings, not for maximizing minutes at all costs. That's why the experience feels complete even when flights are short. You're encouraged to land, swap batteries, go again, and because setup is fast and the drone behaves consistently, that loop doesn't feel annoying, it feels natural. For casual users, parks, trips, family moments, short creative sessions, this balance makes a lot of sense. You're capturing moments, not mapping land. You're flying short sequences, not marathon missions. You're exploring angles, not chasing range records. In that context, the Neo 2 feels tuned correctly. Where it won't make sense is for people who measure value strictly in minutes per battery. If staying airborne as long as possible is your top priority, there are drones built specifically for that, and they make very different compromises. The Neo 2 doesn't pretend to be one of them. Okay, here is the important takeaway. The battery doesn't define the Neo 2 as much as the experience between takeoff and landing does. And that experience is calm, it's controlled, it's predictable. You don't land because you're stressed. You land because you're satisfied. And that's why the battery feels like part of the design, not a flaw in it. After a month with the Neo 2, something becomes very clear. This drone doesn't feel unfinished. It feels intentionally constrained, and that's an important difference. Most imperfect products feel like they're missing something. The Neo 2 doesn't feel like that. It feels like DJI drew a line and said, this is what this drone is allowed to be. You can feel that line every time you fly. It doesn't chase extreme speed. It doesn't chase long distance range. It doesn't chase headline numbers. Instead, it chases consistency. And consistency is what gives this drone its personality. The Neo 2 gives you just enough performance to feel capable without ever pushing you into a mindset where you feel like you need to manage risk constantly. You're not thinking, can it handle this? Will it drift? Is the footage gonna wobble? You're thinking, where should I go next? That's the quiet magic of this drone. And it's also where the imperfection comes in, because eventually every session ends the same way. The battery reminder shows up and you're forced to stop. Not because you want to, but because the drone tells you it's time. That boundary is real and it's unavoidable, but it also shapes how you fly. Here's something I didn't expect. Shorter flights actually made my flying better because I know I have limited time. I don't waste it. I don't hover endlessly. I don't fly aimlessly. I don't figure things out in the air. I launch with intent. I execute. I land. That rhythm keeps the experience focused. And because the drone behaves so predictably, I'm not burning battery on corrections or retrees. Every flight feels purposeful. That's a subtle psychological effect, but it matters. The Neo 2 doesn't let you get lazy in the air, but it also doesn't punish you for being creative. This is where a lot of online discussions miss the point. People often try to judge the Neo 2 using enthusiast metrics. Maximum flight time, maximum speed, maximum range, maximum feature count. But the Neo 2 isn't really aimed at enthusiasts who obsess over numbers. It's aimed at people who want confidence without commitment. People who want to fly without planning, whereas launch without stress, on a capture moments without setup fatigue. That's why it feels so different from drones that are technically better. Because better specs don't automatically create a better experience, right? The Neo 2 lowers the mental load of flying, and once that happens, you want to fly more often, even if each session is shorter. There are drones that impress you the first time you fly them, and then slowly feel like work. The Neo 2 does the opposite. It doesn't overwhelm you on day one. It doesn't try to show off. It just quietly builds trust, and trust creates habit. I don't pull it out because I plan to shoot. I pull it out because I feel like flying. That's rare. Most drones demand intention. This one invites curiosity, the flaw that defines the product. If there's one thing that truly defines the Neo 2, it's this. It makes you want more time in the air, not because it failed you, but because it didn't. The limitation isn't frustration, it's interruption. And that's why the drone feels almost perfect. It gives you everything you need to enjoy flying, and just enough restriction to remind you what it is: a small drone, a casual drone, a confidence-first drone. From a long-term perspective, this balance matters more than specs, A drone that exhausts you mentally gets flown less. A drone that scares you gets flown less. A drone that feels fragile gets flown less. The Neo 2 avoids all three. You can hand it to someone else without fear. You can fly it in imperfect conditions. You can trust it to behave. That makes it a drone you keep around, not one that sits on a shelf. The uncomfortable truth: if DJI increased the battery significantly without changing anything else, this drone would stop being what it is. Longer flight time would push people to hover longer, to overthink, to experiment endlessly. That sounds good, but it would change the rhythm. The Neo 2's short sessions are part of why it feels satisfying. That's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes limits make products better. The long-term verdict and who the Neo 2 is actually for. After almost a month of flying the DJI Neo 2, the conclusion isn't dramatic, but it's very clear. This drone isn't trying to impress you, it's trying to stay out of your way, and that's why it works. Like, the Neo 2 doesn't demand preparation, it doesn't demand perfect conditions, it doesn't demand commitment. You don't feel like you need to plan a session around it. You don't feel like you need to justify flying it. You just take it out, fly, and enjoy the process. That alone puts it in a very small category. Who this drone makes sense for. If you're someone who flies casually, parks, trips, short creative moments, family time, spontaneous ideas, the Neo 2 fits naturally into that lifestyle. You're not thinking about checklists, you're not thinking about battery math, you're not thinking about whether the drone can handle the situation. You trust it to behave, and that trust is what removes friction. This is the kind of drone you keep in your bag because it doesn't feel like a responsibility, it feels like an option. Who this drone is not like Rayos. If your idea of value is measured purely in maximum flight time, maximum speed, maximum range, or how long you can stay airborne on a single battery, then this isn't the drone you should be looking at. There are other drones that do those things better, right? And they make very different compromises to get there. The Neo 2 doesn't compete in that lane, and it doesn't pretend to. What DJI actually got right here, the most important thing DJI did with the Neo 2 wasn't improving a single spec, it was choosing a philosophy. They optimized for calm behavior, your predictability, your trust, and ease of use, and they accepted the trade-offs that come with that decision. The battery life isn't a mistake. The limitations aren't oversights, they're boundaries. Boundaries that keep the drone honest about what it's meant to be. Why the Neo 2 stays enjoyable over time. Now, some drones impress you once and slowly feel like work. Others scare you into being careful. Some feel fragile. Some feel stressful. The Neo 2 avoids all of that. It doesn't ask for your attention. It doesn't punish small mistakes. It doesn't turn flying into management. And because of that, you keep coming back to it. Not for epic shots, not for long missions, but because flying it feels good. The honest takeaway: the DJI Neo 2 is not perfect, and it's not trying to be. It's a small drone that behaves bigger than it looks, flies calmer than you expect, and encourages you to explore just enough before gently telling you it's time to land. And that interruption isn't frustration, it's balance. And for the kind of flying most people actually do, that balance makes sense. If you already own the Neo 2, I'm genuinely curious, do you find yourself wanting to keep flying when the battery runs out, or does the flight time feel right for how you use it? Drop your experience in the comments, it helps everyone make smarter decisions. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one.